Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have the Honorable Aubrey Layne with us, Secretary of Finance. Good to see you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. Good to see you.
We're at a pretty precipitous time. I believe this time next week you will have completed crossover in terms of the budget. How are things going?
Well, crossover is going to come next week, whether we're ready for it or not, but I think that we will be ready for it. As you know, a change in control of the leadership this year, and a lot of that planning had to put in place in the last few months of the year because of the change, and they've got a lot of work to do, but I'm comfortable they'll get there. It's an unprecedented amount of new legislation that was put in this year. Of course, they had budget amendments. But I think they're working through it, and quite frankly, I think they've done a pretty good job of getting us to this point.
Now, you have 4 major agencies under your jurisdiction. Talk to us a little bit about what they do.
I do. Thank you. As the Secretary of Finance, of course, taxation, which is everybody's favorite agency, reports to me, along with the Department of Accounts, which does obviously, the bookkeeping and record keeping for the Commonwealth and many of its agencies. Department of Planning and Budget is a popular agency this time of year, not only putting together the governor's budget, but also working on all these fiscal impact statements that affect all this new legislation that's coming along. And then, of course, Treasury, which does all the money management and all the borrowing on behalf of the Commonwealth, which will be a big topic this year about the amount of debt that the Commonwealth has. So they're the 4 main ones. I recently picked up the Board of Accountancy as under my jurisdiction. That means a lot of sense. If you remember last year, Woody, we had a lot of policy changes on tax. So now having them as an advocacy group to work with and understanding the industry is very, very, I think, good for the Commonwealth. And then the Virginia Resource Authority, although it doesn't directly report, it's an independent authority, they coordinate with my office. So a lot going on this time of year, and thankfully I've got very good people, and the Commonwealth does, running those agencies.
Let's focus on revenues for a moment. I take it that the lifting of sequestration, for example, has had a significant economic impact on the amount of revenues we are collecting?
It has. In fact, if you had to pick one item, particularly to Virginia, that has been most beneficial in revenue generation, it has been the federal budget, beginning back in 2018 when those sequestration limits were lifted. And for all the viewers out there that may not understand exactly what that means, there was a limitation put on defense spending or non-discretionary spending. And of course, Virginia is one of the top recipients, and in many of the grant programs, the top recipient for defense spending. So our shipyards in the eastern part of the state in Hampton Roads, and of course all our defense contractors in Northern Virginia, aside from all the other military installations across the state, benefited from that budget. So while the national economy has been good, and we've been a part of that, that budget, the federal budget, that particular action on lifting sequestration, very, very beneficial. You can go back and look from that time when we started making our movement upward and really coming out of the Great Recession.
So where are we in terms of the budget right now, in terms of the economy of the whole state?
Well, actually it's good. If you look at our revenue generation, it has been very good, particularly as I related to the federal budget actions, but we now know that, for instance, the federal economy is going to keep money very cheap. So monetary policy is very loose. That has kept interest rates down, and that has helped spur economic activity, not only in the Commonwealth, but of course across the nation here. Have to mention, we talked about tax policy, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, not only was it stimulative in terms of some particular activity, economic activity, but certainly from a tax policy standpoint, because of differences between federal and state law, Virginia did benefit in that regard also. I'll mention the Wayfair legislation. This is the internet taxes that was put into place last year, which is now makes us on a competitive ground to collect taxes not only from the traditional retailers, but from the internet sellers. And a lot of that, people would say that was unfair for those to not be able to get that tax, but it certainly helped the revenues in the Commonwealth. And of course, job growth has been good in Virginia. In fact, our unemployment rate's at 2.6%, I believe, one of the lowest in many, many decades. That's the good news. The bad news is our unemployment rate's at 2.6%, so we're having to continue this growth to look for workers. Now, wage growth has been good. That helps our withholding taxes here in the Commonwealth, people payroll taxes paying us. But I think if we look ahead, probably the biggest opportunity we have is to continue the robust job growth that could be available to us and to keep our continuing revenues coming and our economy strong.
If you had a pie chart, where do the revenues fall within that pie chart? Individual taxes is the largest
yes,
portion?
sir. In fact, we're very dependent on two revenue sources. One, individual income taxes, which make up, when you add the payroll taxes and then what's called non-withholding taxes, those taxes that are paid for wealth generation or when you pay us to get your tax return, they make up close to almost 70% of our budget. The other big generator is a sales tax, and that makes up somewhere about 18%. So you can see between those two sources, the majority of our revenues are related to economic activity, that is jobs and people getting wage increases, or of course the consumer continuing to buy. Fortunately, both of those are good in the Commonwealth right now.
Talk to us a little bit more about that non-withholding piece, because I understand that there are about 1,000 high net worth individuals that can make or break our budget. It
really is. The non-withholding piece is the most volatile part of our revenues, and that is it's really related to wealth generation. So that if the stock market, people take gains or they sell businesses, that tends to generate wealth, and people pay us over and above what their normal earnings might be from their jobs or their businesses. So I'll just bring you back to where we were in 2013 and how tax policy can play havoc with that revenue source. And at the end of 2013, the Bush tax cuts were expiring. And so a lot of people rushed out and sold stocks at the end, or sold their businesses at the end of 2013 to get a lower tax rate. So in 2014, when they paid their taxes, we had a fairly significant increase in this very volatile tax, non-withholding. Well, we thought that was going to continue back then, and of course our budget is based on the previous year of revenues. We budgeted on that, and guess what? The next year, taxpayers decided, you know, we didn't sell as many stocks this year, and we had a hole in our budget. In fact, it was the first year of the McAuliffe administration, and remember that was a big part of what we had to do in his first year. So now we put some parameters around that because we know it's volatile. But to get to your particular point, it's about 1,000 people that pay a significant amount of money, several $100 million, or don't pay, depending on that economic activity related to wealth generation. If history is the guide, then the next year they don't pay us as much as they did the previous year. And that's where we are this year. We had, because of tax policy changes with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at the federal level, we had some additional income taxes, some wealth generation. The question is, will it continue into this year? Obviously, the second half of the year, people pay us their fourth quarter estimated taxes. They pay us their final taxes with the return. We won't know the final story till sometime around May the 1st. So while our economy is good and our revenues look great to date, I still have this caution to see what is it going to look like when we get the final returns? And I tell people we were very fortunate to get the estimates right when we did all these policy changes last year. All I can tell you this year is they've changed, because people will change their behavior now that they know how tax policy is driven. And in fact, typically we're what's called a conformity state. That's a pretty perfunctory thing. Every year, it's the first bill passed, we conform to the federal tax code. Last year it took a while. This year we've conformed at both pieces of legislation on our conformity. Both the Senate and House are gone through, so we're smooth sailing. But the rules have changed from last year. They know what it was, so we'll see what these tax collections come in at the end of the year.
As a result of those tax changes last year, you were able to refund monies to Virginia taxpayers.
We were. We knew that because of the action of the General Assembly, we couldn't change the current year because the tax season was already over with, 2018, or at least the ability for taxpayers to make payments in 2018. So it was decided that we would give a large portion of that back, over $420 million, back to individuals last year. And then, of course, we made policy changes going forward. We increased the standard deduction in Virginia so that we gave them refunds last year and adjusted the impacts of the federal taxes going forward. So that's leading to a little bit of uncertainty about what our total revenues are going to be. But the good news is, through the first 6 or 7 months, we're trending well ahead of where our plans were to be. So even if we have a backup in that particular source, I think we're still going to be in good shape for the current year.
And of course, you have a very significant reserve now.
We do. In fact, I think Governor Northam would say that would be one of his significant things he promised when he came into office, is to replenish the reserves. Certainly during the Great Recession, using reserves was the thing to do. But we had gotten it down to under $250 million. Now, for our viewers to understand, your viewers to understand this, that we have about a $22 billion general fund budget each year, a very insignificant amount in case we would have another downturn. So working with the General Assembly, taking some of these windfalls that we've had related to good revenues exceeding our expenditures, good fiscal management, and planning. With the governor's introduced budget, and at the end of that budget in 2021, we will have $1.9 billion in reserves, the most in history. And that allowed us to get off of this watch from the credit agencies saying you don't have enough in reserves. But more importantly, it means if we go into another downturn, and Woody, as you know, we're in the 11th year of this business expansion. I'm not saying it's going to end tomorrow. I'm just saying it's going to end sometime. We're in much better shape now if we go into a downturn, and most economists believe the next couple of years will probably be a soft landing, not a recession, but a slowing. Well, now we don't have to go through this process of cutting our core programs. We've got reserves over there. So very proud that working with the General Assembly, Governor Northam's been able to accomplish that.
And we've held the AAA bond rating for what, 80 plus years now?
81 years, 1938. We're the longest holding of the AAA rated bond rating of all three major rating agencies of any state in the country. Certainly don't want to lose that. I know the governor doesn't, and I don't want to be the Secretary of Finance if that were ever put in jeopardy. So very keen on fiscal responsibility. And again, that was a big part of the governor's introduced budget, making sure not only put money in reserves, but we had what's called a structurally balanced budget, meaning that our core programs were covered with ongoing revenues. They weren't one time that we were trying to cover a salary increase, for instance. So it's structurally balanced, and I'm pretty comfortable that the rating agencies will look favorably upon this year as to how Virginia has managed its finances.
Now that reserve is different from the rainy day fund?
Well, in fact, the $1.9 billion does include the two types of reserves we have. And to your point, Woody, you're right. We have a constitutionally mandated rainy day reserve fund, meaning if our revenues go up a certain amount, it's an average over the last 10 years of 2%, and it's a formula that we go through, we are mandated to put those into a stabilization fund or our reserves. The problem with that is you can't get it out unless you reach a point in time when your reserves or when your revenues are going down. So the General Assembly, after what happened in 2013 and 14, put in, working with the governor, at that time Governor McAuliffe and now Governor Northam, what's called cash reserves, which we can voluntarily put monies into, and that's where we've put them. Now, we don't want to take them out. We're going to be very rigid in taking them out, not just because, well, we want to do another program, but we can access those reserves much easier than the mandated stabilization fund.
Now, the other unprecedented item in the budget, I believe, is $100 million that the governor has basically set aside to work with the General Assembly on.
Yes, in fact, that again is unprecedented. It's actually $100 million per year in the next the biennial budget, so $200 million. And we mentioned earlier that there was a change in leadership. First time we've had consolidated leadership in the Commonwealth with one party, the Democratic Party, now controlling the Senate, the House, and the governorship, of course, with Governor Northam. And so, not that we didn't have a congenial and working relationship, but knowing that those individuals were coming in with some of the issues that they had dealt with in their campaigns, we appropriated the money, but didn't particularly put it to a specific program. And that was the governor reaching out saying, we know we have other things we need to do, but I want to work with you on what those programs, what's important to you, instead of us tying it all up and then them having to find and cutting some other issues, some other programs, leaving it out there. Now, of course, we knew there were some issues when the budget was issued that they might want to deal with. For instance, a minimum wage increase. The governor did not have that in his budget, certainly has said that is something that he would consider and support, but wanted to work with the General Assembly on that. Other salary increases to state employees, for instance, is another item out there that many people campaigned on. Governor is said that he would like to work with them on. So it wasn't because we couldn't have found uses for the money and didn't have uses. It was simply to reach out to say, hey, let's work together. We don't have to always be adversarial. How can we best utilize these monies? And of course, this is over and above putting money in reserves. So this, I want to make our viewers know, this was not about having monies that we didn't know what to do anything with, because there are plenty of programs we could have put these monies in. We wanted, the governor wanted, as deference to the new leadership, to send out and say, hey, let's work together on this.
You mentioned employee raises. How is the retirement fund doing? Some states have been in big trouble. I know a number of years ago we went from defined benefit plans to more of a 401k type of system, giving employees more portability and that kind of thing. But how's the retirement fund doing?
Well, you know, Woody, I'm happy to say that Virginia is one of those states that not only has been a good fiduciary in their budget, but in terms of also our employees' retirement funds. While we're not 100% funded, we're somewhere around 75%. Would like to be a little bit more, but it's been very stable. And as you mentioned, actions have been taken to help the employees and giving them more versatility in the type of funds they're invested in. But importantly this year, because we look at the stock market, of course, we did the budget at the end of last year. So far, the stock market's rebounded this year. But it's going to be harder and harder to make a 7% return. That's what the annualized assumptions that the Virginia retirement system was using in determining the amount of earnings that would come in to help supplant the funds necessary to pay retiree benefits. I think they made the right decision this year and said, no, we should reduce that to 6 3/4%. Now that doesn't sound a lot, 1/4%, but that's $100 million a year more the general fund needs to reimburse. It's the right thing to do, because those are, I think, sacred contracts with our employees that they've worked, and they should get those retirement programs as they were intended. So it was reduced. We are putting more money in, and so that will help pay down this liability even quicker. So the overall good news is we have good stewards at the Virginia Retirement System, VRS. They do a very good job of stewarding the money. They made the prudent decision, which the General Assembly and the governor agreed with, to say we don't want to stretch and take on more risks. Let's be realistic about what type of earnings we're going to have, and the general fund will step up and make sure that's included in the governor's budget. So very, very another positive. You mentioned the rating agencies. They like to see us taking down those long-term obligations, and so that's another very big positive for this budget.
I understand that there's been a deterioration in lottery fund proceeds as a result of these gray machines. Talk to us about that phenomenon.
Yes, a big topic this year in the General Assembly is going to be that of gaming. Most people think of casinos in that regard, and they'll be a part of it. But of course, there's other things. Sports betting will be a part that'll be discussed this year. Historical horse racing was let in last year. But probably the one that's getting the most attention is what's called these games of skill. Now, others would call them gray machines. And gray being, it's debatable of whether or not they are lawful in the Commonwealth. Games of skill are supposedly where a player can sit down and has an equal chance of winning and could win every time. I would tell you, if you put a game of skill and a slot machine and a historical racing machine in front of the average consumer, they couldn't tell the difference. They all look pretty much the same.
So are these in retail establishments?
That's right. So what's happened is, instead of waiting to see what was going to happen, these gray machines have proliferated across the state. Right now, we've had estimates. The lottery thinks it's around 12,000. We've heard estimates of up as 20,000. And they're on unregulated, they're in convenience stores, they're in gas stations, they're just popping up all over. And what that's done is it has impacted our lottery profits. Now, our lottery is 100% used to fund K through 12 education. So while it is gaming, it is 100% for a public purpose. That is not what's happening with these gray machines. They're all for a private purpose. They're for a profit. The lottery estimates, unless something is done, they're going to lose about $150 million in sales and possibly as much as $40 to $50 million in profits that would go to fund K through 12. So what the governor has done in his budget is said we have got to take some type of action this year to either regulate these machines and tax them and get revenues, or to ban them and let the lottery profits rebound, because otherwise we're going to have, a $40 or $50 million hole in our budget each year because of their impact. So there are laws that are going, or pieces of legislation that are now being looked at, some completely banning them, some regulating them, but of course it's got to be taken into this whole consideration of what does Virginia want to look like by allowing in gaming. And I think, from a very personal standpoint, having a slot machine in every store, convenience store in the Commonwealth or on every corner may not be the best angle for us to take. So that's where the governor has been. If either ban them, regulate them, and if we're going to have them, let's make sure we consider what it does to these impacted individuals in neighborhoods, whether that's because of socioeconomic, whether it's because of crime, what are all the social issues that we need to deal with, because the lottery has done a very good job of setting out what it means to when you're gaming and what the other effects could be, and let's make sure we do it right.
Some additional tax proposals in the budget, cigarette tax, for example.
There is. The governor has proposed increasing the cigarette tax about 30% per pack, and to use it to help health care in the Commonwealth by two programs, helping reduce those issues related to smoking, therefore setting up an exchange that would allow individuals to get a lower potential premium. And so it would not be into our general revenues. Its specific purpose to go to help those individuals that may need that type of assistance through our health care fund. It's important to point out there's some other legislation that's out there about equalizing localities, towns, and cities in the Commonwealth, and that legislation with the cigarette tax needs to be coordinated with that, because in addition to having a state tax, localities can tax those cigarettes at the local level. And obviously, we have a large employer here in the Commonwealth that's very important to our economics. Want to work with them in making sure that we're being acceptable to what their benefits are for the employees here in the Commonwealth.
Is there a similar impact in what happened last year in terms of I-81 and the increase in the gas tax this year?
Yes, significant legislation out there that would increase the statewide gas tax, 4% a year for 3 years, or for 12%, and then index it to inflation, but also some additional regional taxes here in the Richmond area, like was done in the Interstate 81. And so I think that would really be a good, something good for transportation. One word of caution is most of those funds will be using to issue new debt. And so I just would caution, we need to make sure that as we look at the total debt burden, even though it may not be paid directly from appropriated income taxes or sales taxes, it still is debt on our Commonwealth's books, and just make sure we're monitoring how we do that. But that aside, looks like that it would be good news for drivers and rail advocates here in the Commonwealth to increase our transportation abilities.
And of course, the governor is making significant investment in education.
Absolutely, $1.2 billion in K through 12 education. I know there's others that wish there would be more, and of course that's one of the things that's working its way through the General Assembly. But not only that, but higher education within the tech talent pipeline, where we are now with all our higher educational institutions working to put the advanced degrees in those areas that the tech area needs, particularly part of the Amazon deal that we did. So significant investments. We've talked about early childhood investment the governor's proposed. His G3 initiative, which allows those individuals to get free college education that would apply, and not just the education, but also the social impacts in helping them get through college. So significant increase, because that's the key to our future, is our educated workforce.
About a minute left. Can't let you go away without talking about the continued investment in the Port of Virginia.
It is something very, very proud to have been associated with as the former Secretary of Transportation. You know, that is probably the best kept secret in the Commonwealth. It's if you tell the viewers, if you had a chance to go down and take a view of it. But yes, we've made investments not only in the port side facilities and increasing the amount of throughput, but certainly in deepening and widening the channel. We mentioned earlier, we were talking before the program about these large ships coming through the Panama Canal, and also there's a very big opportunity in wind energy. And the governor has $40 million in the budget for Portsmouth Marine Terminals to be set up and house what could be a significant new industry for Hampton Roads and the Commonwealth and the solar farms off the coast of Virginia. So Port of Virginia is doing extremely well, and something that all Virginians can be proud of.
Well, thank you for being here, Secretary of Finance Aubrey Layne. Good luck.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all Virginians.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.